Hello.
Hello.
Am I audible to you?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Okay, please give me a minute, just a few seconds.
Yeah, Saurabh, no problem. Yeah.
Thank
Do keep your mic off in the meantime. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
Saurabh. Yes, please go on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm Saurabh. I'm volunteering at Mega Difference right now, and looking forward to take some guidance from you.
Hi, Saurabh. Welcome. In fact, Anjali is also here. We have
Okay.
a few minutes before we start the webinar, so please
Okay.
feel free to even talk to her if you have questions and
Yes.
like
Yes.
if there's anything you want to talk to her about.
All right. All right.
Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah, I can hear you. Anjali here.
Okay.
Yeah. 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 Hi, Ekta.
Hi, Anjali. Good to see you.
Yeah. So, how many have joined?
As of now, we have about 15 participants.
Okay.
So we'll just wait for another few minutes before we start for sure.
Okay.
But I've just requested the participants that if they have questions or concerns and just tell you a little bit why they're here, maybe
Yeah.
interact with you as well.
Yeah.
Hi, Saurabh. I think your mic is on, Saurabh.
Okay.
Could you please mute yourself? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, people who've just joined us, we're just giving ourselves 1 or 2 more minutes for others to join in. In the meantime, I think you've just seen responses that are flowing in from in the chat window. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. Why are you here? What are you seeking to gain from this webinar today? And also, like, feel free to speak to Anjali. She's already here. So maybe use this time to just chat with her, interact with her. Thank you.
It's like they're all typing the responses.
Yeah.
Okay, any more joined? Ekta? Ekta, you've gone off. Yeah, you're mute.
Hi, Anjali. Yes,
Yeah.
I just wanted to close my door as well, just to stop
Okay.
disturbance. Yeah. So we'll start.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So some more joined? About.
Yes, we do have additional people. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Great. So,
Okay. Yeah, you introduce them.
yeah, just a few things. I'll just introduce you, Anjali,
Yeah.
and then I'll just hand over the space to you. So, welcome everyone. This is the second part of the three-part series of social science webinar. And it's today, I think the topic is really about looking at dialogues and what does a dialogue actually mean in the process of building a democratic classroom or space. And in the earlier one, we had discussed a little bit about what democracy means and what are the democratic processes that we can take back to our classrooms. In fact, while I'm talking a little bit about today's webinar, people who attended the earlier webinar do think a little bit about the last webinar, and if you've actually used some of those strategies in the classroom, do share them with us in the chat window as well. I think it'll be interesting to know what are the challenges that you faced while implementing those strategies, as well as just like the motivation to try them out as well. And what are the different responses that you got in your own classroom. So today's webinar, we've specifically also, we are dealing with a lot of classroom strategies again. So we'll keep, it will be nice to just keep hearing from you, like, in the chat window, like difficulties and other things that one might face in implementing those. So looking for a lively chat. So just to introduce Anjali to you, people especially who are not part of the first webinar, Anjali has an MA from Delhi School of Economics. She has extensive and intensive experience in the field of social science education, language education, and teacher education for the last 35 years. She has also been involved in areas of textbook and curriculum in all three areas that I mentioned, and policy development in school education and teacher education, having been a member of National Council for Teacher Education and various national planning groups. She is also one of the founding members of Eklavya, a non-profit organization that's based in Madhya Pradesh, which has participated in government school curriculum and textbook reform, improvement in pedagogy and teacher education for over 3 decades. And this is also where I first met Anjali, and I've actually learned a lot from her through that time. And even in planning these webinars, it's been a very educational endeavor. And just to tell you a little bit about the norms for today's webinar, because so that all of us are on the same pace and the space is fruitful for everybody. The webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to all of you after this recording. We've also summarized the points for today. We will share all of that with you in the email. In the course of the webinar, if you have any technical issues or questions or comments, please just type it in the chat window Ashwath, one of our team members, is going to keep constantly communicating with you through the chat window. So feel free to write any questions or concerns. Also, so that there is no stress on the bandwidth today, I am also going to switch off my own video and request others to switch off your mic and video so that there is no background noise. I think I already can hear a little bit of noise. So just please check that if you've switched off your mics so that only Anjali's video is on. Thank you. And through the week as well, Anjali has put in a lot of effort to see your questions that you've sent us through the registration form. In case if you feel there are some questions that were not addressed during Anjali's entire presentation, we are going to have an open forum in the end. So feel free to raise all your questions there. Yeah. Until then, I hope we have an interactive session today, and I'm looking forward to what Anjali has for us today. Anjali, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. It's good to be back, though a little late, but it gave me some more time for preparation and learning from the previous feedback about structuring. This time we have a PowerPoint. I'll be communicating mostly through the PowerPoint, and in between we'll have a little, we won't have a breakaway group because that becomes a little tedious in this technology, but we will have a little bit of reflection, brief reflection, which you can type into your chat window, and also some reflective tasks in between. Since the whole theme of this webinar is on dialogue and democracy, but organizing a dialogue, in a sense, there will be a dialogue through this process, but in terms of a group dialogue, this medium doesn't lend itself very well to a group dialogue. So that will be one limitation. But the interaction that we have, because dialogues are also written, I'll dwell a little bit about the difference between written and oral dialogues. So recapping a bit from the last seminar, and in between, some of you may have also attended the multilingualism webinar, and some of your questions reflect that. The medium of instruction on something like democracy and social science, how does that influence the learning and conceptualization? So looking at the democracy a bit, we will think about the development of a democracy. Language and thinking, of course, both of them are extremely important. More than doing, the thinking and the language through which we negotiate is extremely important for a democratic process to take place. So what are the things that we need to keep in mind while we are interacting, communicating, dialoguing with people, so that the dialogues don't break? Those are some of the issues that we will be taking up. And just to sort of, since one good thing, we're meeting today just the day after our Independence Day, and there's a lot of freedom is one of the pillars of our constitution, as we discussed in the last webinar, and there's a lot of debate as to how independent or how free we really are, and who is free and who is not free. And that is also one of the things that dialogic interaction tries to take into cognizance, the whole issue of equality, which I will come to. So at the end of this webinar, during this webinar and by the end of it, I will take up, a number of you have asked about the activities to do with dialogue and democracy. So I will be looking at dialogic activities and its relation to democracy. But the other more general questions or questions about social science activities and so on, that I will leave to the third webinar, which will wrap up which will connect both these webinars and take things forward. The outline of this presentation is that we will talk about language and thought and the relationship between the two. And we will also talk about dialogue as one form of communication and how it is different from other forms, particularly arguments and argumentation, and what are the purposes of dialogue. It has more than one purposes, and the purpose also determines how what kind of frame we keep for the dialogue. And communicating democratically, how can we use dialogue, both oral and written, to develop democratic processes. That will be briefly the outline of the presentation. So we'll start with a minute or two of reflection on some of these questions, and you can put your responses in the chat box. I'll stop sharing this. One of the questions is that just think about this: can you think without language? Are language and thought the same? How are they different? And can you think without language? Does thought come before language, or language before thought? And what is the relationship between experience and language? So these three questions, just your top of the hat kind of immediate responses to this. You can type into your chat box. I'll stop this share so that I can look at the chat. Okay. Ekta, can I? Yeah. Shit.
Anjali, do you want me to share the screen?
1 second. No, I'm just looking for my. Yeah.
Sure. Anjali, why don't we look at the responses that are coming in? In the
Yeah.
meantime, I can share the screen if you want.
Yeah, my screen is not coming on the. Let me join again.
Sure. Or I can share the screen.
Yeah, just share the screen.
And you can look at the responses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, now it's back. Yeah. So. Yeah. So basically, this is the question about exploring the specifics of language and the specifics of thought and their interrelationships, how they develop. So, yes, language here we are talking of language as the verbal language. And yes, visuals are outside of that, and we can think in visuals or in sounds which are not exactly words. So uh, uh, at the same time, there's an independence between language and thought, as well as there is a relationship. Language and thought are not exactly the same thing. This is something that after a lot of exploration and investigation, there's a consensus about this, that language and thought are separate, and they more or less develop together and interact with each other. But that is something that we all know, and therefore that doesn't really say very much. So how do we get beyond that initial thing that the two are independent but interrelated and they feed into each other? So how do we? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Anjali, we can hear you. I think somebody there was a disturbance in between. Please, hi everyone who's here. Please try to keep your mics off. It just causes a little bit of disturbance. Yeah, people who've just joined in. Anandan, I think your mic is still on. Thank you. Yeah, Anjali, please continue.
Yeah. So, how do we sort of investigate these questions, and how do we come to a deeper understanding of these? So, a little bit about the process. We all see linguistic behavior around us, from children and adults, and everyone can see that there are patterns of these behaviors. 3-year-olds behave in a certain way in terms of their thought processes as well as in terms of their linguistic behavior. And as adults, all of us from different backgrounds, we behave in particular ways. There are some universal patterns and there are some cultural patterns of behavior. So observation of behavior and then hypothesizing on the basis of those behaviors to further investigate and seeing whether there are contradictions to those hypotheses. And this has been basically the method by which both thought and language have been investigated. Today we have a much stronger source in terms of brain research, where the brain synapses and the kind of stimuli are the electrical impulses are investigated through brain scans while certain linguistic experiments are taking place. And this has added to, most of the time it seems to have ratified some of the hypotheses that right from the early 1900s people had been putting forth. So because of lack of time, many of you would have heard of the three most well-known names who have investigated and written about language and thought. One is Piaget. Okay, yeah. Piaget, who was born in 1896 and was there till with the constructivist kind of approach to learning, in which his basic, which is different from the behaviorist approach, where people feel that if you give a stimulus and on the response, if that is the behaviorist approach says this, and if the on the response there is either reinforcement or a punishment, learning takes place. Wherever there is punishment, that learning is given up, and wherever there is a motivation or reinforcement, that learning gets embedded. Whereas Piaget's seminal work actually brought out that children, human beings construct knowledge on the basis of their experience. So the kind of behaviorist kind of a stimulus response kind of behavior is pre-verbal thought, in a sense, where when you see a small child developing, it tries to catch a ball and keeps hitting the ball. An infant, 4, 5 or 3 months, when you have these mobiles hanging on top of the cradle, and tries many times, and slowly his hits become better. So there is thought, in the sense that he is focused on a certain activity and is trying to fulfill a purpose with certain steps. And this kind of behavior, which the up till say 1.5-year-olds depict, you can see in what are called intelligent mammals as well, in dogs, in dogs, cats, chimpanzees, of course, where they can do, and crows have been observed to do this. You see this kind, and they don't have a language. And by language, one means that they have sounds. All animals have sounds. Insects, perhaps, their sounds we can't hear, but they don't have, by language I mean a structure. All languages have a structure. Without that pattern structure of the sentences and the elements of grammar, we would not be able to make sense of language. So pre-verbal thought is thought before this structure of language develops. And in this, experience is extremely important. I'd asked a question about how we relate experience and language. In fact, to focus on experience, language is a very important tool, and that's how it helps develop thought. And experience was also very important. Experience and the interaction with the natural world was also very important to Piaget's hypothesis. And then, as the infant mind looks at experience around, he categorizes those experiences. So categorization is an extremely important first step of developing thought, and also helps in acquiring language. So there are the classic examples of Piaget's theory of accommodation and assimilation, in which a child looking at, say, 4-legged animals, and the adult says that this is called a dog. So all 4-legged animals, but most of them bark, and then you come across other animals which make other sounds. So then the generalizations start, and that the contradiction is then accommodated and later assimilated into a larger category of animals, and which are then later on, when the child learns, they further again subdivide those animals on different different attributes. So Chomsky is still alive. He's about 89. So I won't be dwelling in the person I'll be talking about more, and his work is Vygotsky, who has made seminal contributions even in his very short life. Chomsky's basic premise is that, and his work is more on language than on overall, also on cognitive development, but uh, his basic contribution is that the human mind has something like a language acquisition device, a kind of an ability in which the structuring and the grammar can be imbibed. That's why humans, if they live in society, unless they are brain damaged, they will pick up the language of that society. That is, so language is not something to be taught, but it is something to be learned through experience and embeddedness. That has been his seminal contribution. So then I will talk now in a little detail about Vygotsky and uh, his contributions, because he went down to a lot of specifics and has given us a lot of insights which we can use both in dialogue and also in language development per se. First of all, he talks about the relationship of thought and word not being a thing but a process, a continual movement back and forth from thought to word and from word to thought. And both thought and word develop through this process of interaction between the two. So the word meanings are not static word meanings. We'll go into a little more detail. Where then does this dynamic and evolving word meanings and word sense? He makes a distinction between sense and meaning also, which we will come to. And so it is like some of you said that we express our thoughts through words. So it is not only that we express them in words, but thoughts themselves come into being through words. So every thought tends to connect something with something else and establish a relationship between things. Okay, now this is a very important thing. So about language and speech, what he says that the two of these aspects move simultaneously through different planes. One is the semantic or meaning aspect, that you can consider the internal thinking about it, the meaning of it, and the other is the phonetic or expression in sound aspect. And actually what is interesting is that, and we can relate this with our own experiences, that the sound, how we express ourselves in words and how we think or make meaning of the world, they in some senses move in opposite directions when we are growing up through infanthood and childhood. So how does that happen? You would have noticed that very young children, like when they start speaking, this is in Hindi, this is a very standard, I don't know why all children are taught to call water mum mum. So the child will point to water and say they want that, and then the parents will say mum mum, and then they'll get that, and then they express when they want something, they just take the name of that object, which actually means I want that. Because the I is central to a young child. He won't say give this to someone else, give this ball to the dog. If he wants to say that, he will say that word ball and point to the dog, say, if he wants it to be given to the dog. But that one word actually incorporates the whole sentence. So whereas initially that word means a whole sentence, and then slowly they start stringing together 2 or 3 words to make a phrase, and then a whole sentence, and then many sentences to make a conversation. This is the expression part of it. But in the thinking part, the internal process, it is actually going from a whole word sentence, a whole sentence in one word, to then as they add on words, then they actually break up that meaning. So in this sense, the process of thinking from whole meaning to then breaking up that meaning into parts is happening at the thought level and or the semantic level, the meaning making level, and whereas the expression, the phonetic, the sound level is happening from word to making sentences. Now, another aspect that Vygotsky talks about is that thought undergoes many changes as it turns into speech. All of us would think like would understand and relate to this, that when we are, like when I am talking to you at this moment, I am also trying to choose my words, trying to think out and change my words. I change phrases, qualify things. So this whole process, as I'm turning my thoughts into speech, it keeps on changing. And that is very important for dialogue, which I will link later, because often dialogue deteriorates into a kind of opinionated argument because we don't allow that flexibility of evolution of thought while we are discussing with someone else. The second aspect is between the semantic, which is the meaning part of it, and the structure. This is an example from Vygotsky himself. Subject and predicate are the two essential elements of a sentence, but we will relate to this fact that we often basically respond in predicates. And somewhere the meaning comes from the predicate, somewhere the meaning comes from the subject. This example that Vygotsky gives is, and we can think of many such examples from our own life, is that when a clock has stopped, and if you ask the person, why has the clock stopped? And the person says the clock fell. So here the fell part of it, that because the clock fell, it has stopped working, is the important part. That is, the predicate is the important part. But if you hear something falling in the other room and you have a quizzical look, and someone goes into the other room and comes back and says the clock fell, there the clock is the important aspect. But if there is, the person doesn't have to even say the clock fell. In this, it is assumed that askance is being sought of what fell. So you can come back and say clock. So this kind of cryptic language between intimate people where you know the context, this grammatical aspect of language, using that to communicate, is an important connection between the grammatical and the semantic. Similarly, you all asked about the different languages in which we learn anything, in this case, say about democracy. Gender and tense are two very important aspects of verbs in any language, and they're different in different languages. So when we translate from one language to the other, so the example given here is that we've all read the story about the grasshopper and the ant. That's a French story, but where the grasshopper is a feminine gender in French, but it's a masculine gender in Russian. So in communicating the sense and meaning, if a literal translation of grasshopper had been taken, in the social and cultural context of Russian, it wouldn't have made the same kind of sense. And therefore, the choice that was taken was the dragonfly in this sense. And here we can also see that whenever we translate, like it's interesting in Hindi, in Russian and German also, you have gender of objects and nouns, unlike in English. And how you think of these objects also determine how, depending on the grammatical structure, the gender aspect of that structure, how you think of the objects also is determined by that. So this is how language influences thought in some senses. Then there is a very important aspect of inner speech, which is which is different from Piaget's egocentric speech, which the infant does. You would have seen very young children talking to themselves while they are playing and making sense of the world while speaking through that. But inner speech is something else. That is something that even as adults, all of us do to refine thought. If we did not have internal inner speech, we would not be able to develop many of the thinking and much of the thinking that we do develop. So to encapsulate the three elements of semantic, phonetic, and semantic and grammatical associate to develop language and thought through various stages. Vygotsky also talked about, again, yeah, he connects the inner speech to intimate conversations, where in inner speech also, inner speech, when we take notes, for example, that is a very good example of inner speech. Often we would be taking notes in a meeting or something, and if someone else asks for our notes, we would say, you won't understand it, because you are writing for yourself. So that is an inner speech in writing. Also notice this element of predication, which is the predicate being more important than the subject, because you assume it's for yourself, you know what the subject is. So similarly, the subject gets dropped also among people who are very close to each other, who know the context they are talking about. And this can also, if you have a larger group, say you have a group of 5 or 6, and 2 or 3 know each other very well, you would see this in conversations and dialogues. So this predicated speech also excludes the other, because they don't understand the subject context of what they are talking about. So this inner speech and continued expression of this inner speech is an important aspect for keeping in mind in the context of dialogue. Okay, so now in written speech or expression, we all know this, that the tone and the assumption of the context all has to be explicated through writing. And depending on the audience, for example, letter writing has a specific audience, you know whom you are going to write to. So that person may be unknown to you, we email a lot, or you may never have met a person, like I've not met a lot of you who will, some of you will be perhaps mailing me also, but I have to then explicate the context through words much more than if one is face to face. Also the tone is also communicated through the use and the order of words, that the choice and the order of words that we use. So that is written dialogue, and which is different from the oral dialogue. So understanding the written word is all the more complex because of this, because you have to understand the whole social and cultural context as well. And inner speech is also very important for comprehension. We often say, what is the sense you get? So there's a difference between sense and meaning. And it has a grammar of its own. The sense making that you have, the images that a word or a context evokes. And so one has to, when we are communicating in dialogue, whether oral or written, one has to keep exploring what is the sense the other is making of what you are saying. It may be very different images that your words or your speech may be evoking in the other person. So I'll come back to this when we talk about dialogue. So again, Vygotsky keeps on reiterating that the relationship of thought to word is not static, and it is this whole process going through inner speech that actually makes sense and makes meaning out of allocates meaning out of what is said. Now this is a different, the purpose of the communication and the motivation and the volition of the person about the communication is also important. So if one doesn't know the purpose of the other, again one is communicating at, has the chance to communicate at cross purposes. And these are also drawn from social culture, also drawn from the context. For example, if you become a team, you don't know people before that, and you have to work together. So what are different people's working styles? What do they mean when they say something? All those things impact the communication which you do for work. And if you, and there is also a tendency that you assume that what you assume of that context is what the other person would be assuming. So so that is where a lot of the miscommunication takes place. So because of lack of time, I'll mail you this other thing about Boroditsky. She talks about, she's a new person working in Stanford. She talks about language actually influencing thought. So I thought that that would have been an interesting thing, but I'll skip that for the moment.
Anjali, just to give you a sense of what others are feeling in the chat window, I'm just asking people how they're feeling. They're finding it, of course, very useful.
Yeah.
And people are also writing comments such as, I did not know that dialogue had so much in it. And it's always fruitful, I think, in a certain sense, to keep revising your thoughts through the different things that you're just sharing.
Yeah. Sure. Oh. So, Vygotsky has indicated a lot of the contextual part which goes into making meaning. So here is one of the cartoons that Ekta shared today. I think it will liven up the discussion. This is something that in a multicultural society like ours, and particularly when people are becoming conscious of their identities and their own culture, you might find communications like this. Y'all can read, or shall I read it out? Are they able to read, Ekta?
Anjali, I'm just waiting for responses. Yes. Yeah, they can read, I think, yes.
Oh, okay.
Getting a lot of yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would also be interesting to know whether you've come across similar instances in your interactions as well.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, greeting this is one thing that you can also use in activity. How people greet each other. You can get examples from different cultures to stimulate the discussion. For example, in Chhattisgarh, women greet each other saying "Kaisar Sangre," which means what have you made for the day. In the morning, it will be for lunch and for dinner. So food being important, what has been cooked today is the kind of greeting. And interestingly, men don't greet like that. They have a more indifferent greeting. So when I talked about this, then Kannadika said that there is a similar thing in their culture as well. In an example that Vygotsky takes of a tribe from Australia, which is very direction oriented, their greeting is, which way are you going? And they talk in absolute directions and not left and right. They will say north, northeast, or south, southwest. That kind of vocabulary is there. So what is important in the culture and what the other person, how intimate they want to be or how general. For example, great, thanks for the vague, politically correct greeting. Happy holidays. I mean, the happy holidays, people will think, what kind of greeting is that? So this is, of course, similar things that we will encounter. And this is exactly why, now this is something that you can send me back with a paragraph of writing as to what this evokes to you. This is an interesting, Bernard Shaw was a very interesting character, and some of his writings are, he was chauvinistic in many ways, but interesting nevertheless. So you have this, a single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So you say something, I face this almost every day, and I wonder whether I am to blame or the other person is to blame. Or none of us, maybe the context. That you say something, you give an instruction, and you get this, that thing doesn't happen. And there is obviously a miscommunication, and the other person doesn't get back, and later on when you say, ask why it hasn't been done, they'll say, मैंने सोचा इसका ऐसे करना, मैंने सोचा उसको ऐसे बताए. अरे भाई तुमने सोचा तो बात तो कर लो कम से कम कि ऐसा करना है कि वैसे. So that clarificatory part, which is very important in dialogue, is missing. So this kind of thing, if you can associate some of your examples as to where you feel that you had an illusion of communication and then it was actually something else. So shall we move into dialogue?
Yeah, Anjali, let's do that. Sure.
Yeah. So now many of you might think that, which I've tried to clarify here, that dialogue means a conversation between two people, which is not the case, because here it is dia and not die. And dia means through. So any interaction that is taking place through the word, logos is word, is a dialogue. So it's basically a two-way verbal communication. It can be a one-way verbal communication too, but then it is not through a word. I mean, both parties are not involved in it. So the accepted meaning is a community, is a verbal communication between people, and therefore conversation and dialogue is used synonymously because both are not in a sense competitive. So there are various kinds of dialogue. There's a discussion which is not particularly competitive, but arguments and debates, the process of argument and debate is to prove a point, to convince the other, to show that one is right and the other is wrong. Of course, more nuanced argumentation is a part of dialogue in which it helps you move towards some kind of a common understanding. And one of the important things about argumentation is that you question each other and you demand reasoning and logic and evidence. The reasoning can also be emotive. It doesn't have to be evidence-based all the way, I mean data-based in that sense. But for example, why didn't this happen for 3 days? I wasn't feeling like doing it. And then you can go on whatever is happening in your family, and that may not be a very logical kind of thing, but it's a reason nevertheless. So argumentation must always move through reasoning. This is another very interesting cartoon, and Calvin, of course, is one of a lot of our favorites. So what does this evoke? What is this? What is happening? What is Calvin talking about? All of us would have faced this a lot of times.
Can everybody see the screen? Just type in yeses or nos in the chat box as well, so that we know that you can see it. Okay, great. Thank you.
So is Calvin talking about a dialogue, an argument, or what? I mean, what's he talking about?
Also, feel free to unmute yourself and engage here with Anjali. Yeah, just speak over the mic as well. I feel like Calvin is trying to compete, I think, in a certain sense. There's certainly a sense of competition here.
Hello.
Yeah, but like for what? Just to get his word in any which way.
Sorry,
He doesn't
Ankit,
have much to say though. He's not talking about what to say.
Hello.
For sure. Ankit, were you trying to speak?
Yes, yes. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay. So from this, means I can conclude that means sometimes if the other person, if he stops while conversing with you, so we should at least wait for him to complete his sentence. So here he wants to say that the conversation is not a kind of contest, or in the midway we can change the topic, or means we should have patience to listen to his conversation or his idea. Thank you.
Yeah, but someone who, why don't people do this? Do they really wait or do they jump in? And why would they be doing that? What would be the purpose there?
People might lack empathy, or they are not actually actively listening. They are just passing time. So maybe that can be a reason.
Hello.
Yeah. Reena?
Yes. Thank you, Anjali.
A little louder?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
now I can.
I was just thinking that it usually happens during conversation. We try to prove a point, and we just stick to it, and we keep on stretching the point and seeing like counteracting or counter saying things to the other person, so that we are always right, just to be right. So probably it looked like that because it's actually not making any sense.
Yeah.
When he says that, okay, I'm gonna do this, do that, what Calvin says to Hobbes, but it's looking like it has turned into a contest when one person wants to win. So yes, I think it usually happens in life too.
Yeah, but he's not talking about the content or content of the point he wants to make, or he's not. It seems to be to block the other guy's thoughts. So why would you want to block the other guy's thoughts? If you want to actually enrich the subject, would you want to block the other guy's thoughts? Even for an argument, for example, if you got their thoughts, then you could think of how to cut those thoughts and give your own arguments. So is the purpose here any kind of conversation or argument, or is this something, or is it something totally different?
This is Sambir. I think sometimes it could be the attention seekers seeking, right? I think you just want to make a point. Sometimes it could be to take it away into different directions. Sometimes it could be to join. Okay, I also know and I could also contribute. It need not be always. Need not always be like to change the topic. It could be to align it as well.
Yeah. So it could also be to show that some power. The person you cut into, if a person is taking half a second to think of a word and you cut in, so is there a relationship that the person butting in is trying to show? That you are not worth having patience for? I have to show that I am in control. So this is a very normal and important human tendency, which has to be prepared for if you want to have genuine dialogue. So, okay, we'll move to, there are various purposes of dialogue, two fairly different purposes. There are many other purposes as well, but for kind of focus, I'm putting these two. One is open-ended exploratory dialogue, dialogues to understand, say, a topic. Say we had talked last time about democracy or constitution, or we can talk about the idea of freedom. So we all want to understand better what each of these concepts means. So this is a purpose in itself, that you have a dialogue, then people suggest certain things, then you go back and read and find out and think about it, then you come back, and then again next round you pursue that dialogue, or in a kind of community of inquiry. So this kind of dialogue that want to understand an issue and come to some kind of a common understanding, or maybe not even that, just understanding what are the various points of view and what you would tend to agree to, that is a more kind of exploratory purpose of dialogue. What has become extremely important today is the necessity of democratic dialogue, the participation of different people. And we see this, most of you would be working in schools. So the school has a community of teachers, parents, students, each having different expectations from the same classroom, the same subject, the same education. And yet there may be different expectations, sometimes conflicting expectations also, which need to be resolved if together you have to work towards better education. So this kind of democratic dialogue is much more difficult than the exploratory dialogue. So I'll go into a little more detail, but here I would just like to suggest in the activities, I'll give you some issues for activities as well. That you work with open-ended exploratory dialogue before you get into democratic dialogue building for decision making, so that children or your peers come to a better, working together kind of an atmosphere, which are low stakes. Here, when you get into decision making or conflict resolution, there are always sides which you judge as better. So these aspects are they come to the fore when you talk about decision making or conflicts. Whereas when you may have different opinions about a topic and you may have contentions in that, but that is still slightly lower stakes. So the skills that are necessary for any dialogue is that you have to treat the other, whoever is participating in the dialogue, you have to treat everyone equally. And here in our country, here is the biggest challenge, because we have a very, very unequal society, whether it is gender inequality, or whether it is class inequality, or whether it is caste inequality. We, all of us, particularly when we don't have experiences of the other, we have a lot of opinions about them and what they should or should not be allowed to do. So that is the first challenge to any dialogue, even an exploratory dialogue, because allowing girls and boys allowing girls to speak up, to contribute, all these issues will come up, even if you are discussing something like what are the trees in the vicinity. Then to be able to develop this equality in dialogue, you have to practice careful and active listening, which is responsive, which is not like Calvin, when you're waiting, when you get a chance and you jump in just as someone else gives you a break. But you are actually actively listening and you are responding to that. And that listening can be, the person may be saying something about you, that it may say that, look, last time when we were discussing, the way you butted in, I didn't like that, or it hurt me. So being able to listen and absorb that and say, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I'll try and not do that again. Just give me a hint when I'm being abrasive. So being carefully and actively listening and responding to the other person's emotions or content, even content, to explore, is that so? Is that fact that you've given? Just check it. Even for that, to be able to carefully and actively listen. And for that, you have to also then wait for your turn. And so in the dialogue process, a process of how you will take turns and how the discussion will happen is, it is important to decide that beforehand. And everybody, then it makes it easier. Once you take everyone's buy-in on the rules, then it is easier to implement them. Then questioning is important. We have these things, this kind of a attitude these days, that no, don't be critical, don't question people, just take it as it comes. And a lot of the dialogic process, people also encourage this, that no, just take it, don't question the person. So it is important, perhaps in the beginning, in the storming kind of stage, you don't question. But it doesn't mean that in all dialogue you resist from questioning, because how you question, when you question, what kinds of words you use, so that for it to become a meaningful question to explore and to make it reflective for the other, is a very important skill also for developing dialogue. Then being conscious of your words and the time that you are taking, keeping track of the time, and when to say what you want to say. A sense of timing is extremely important.
Anjali, since you mentioned time here, I just want to point out the time here. It's 7:06. Yeah, just wanted to let you know.
Keeping track on my computer. I'm keeping track.
Sure, thank you.
So yeah. So, and then it is important also to summarize and clarify, so that takeaways are kind of consolidated, because in any dialogue or conversation there's a certain flow, and people catch some points, but the whole connected argument may not be caught. So summarizing in between and then taking the questions forward is important. I've already mentioned to some extent, this is a very important and very needed skill today, democratic dialogue, which is different from open-ended kind of dialogue. And because here you have to come towards some kind of a common understanding and consensus, so that to be able to resolve an issue or decide on an action point together with everyone's participation, without people feeling, so making a space for everybody in the decision that you take, so that they then contribute to the implementation of that decision. That is extremely important. And the violence that we see today is a lot because there's a lot of violence and impatience of words. And that's where, I mean, the impatience also leads to the exclusion, and then the feeling of hurt, and then coming back with vengeance. So keeping these aspects in mind when you practice democratic dialogue in the school or within your team, it is extremely important. And this a little time spent, people feel that, you know, developing dialogue is very time consuming. That time definitely is needed, particularly at the beginning. But later on, that kind of practice actually helps you do things very quickly, come to agreements very quickly, or understand the spaces and give that space to everybody. Different viewpoints need to be understood. Now we saw in that cartoon about the greeting that the same thing is taken very differently by different people, and you don't know what hurts, what excludes. And lastly, this kind of misunderstanding that democracy is all about numbers, that the majority decides. That is actually not a very evolved idea of democracy. Democracy, and now people are becoming aware of that, and they are taking indicators of participation and spaces for minority viewpoints as indicators for the amount of democracy that there is. So because one knows that the minority viewpoint can then become give rise to a lot of conflicts which later don't get resolved. So how minority viewpoints are incorporated into democratic dialogue and decision making is extremely important. These are similar things as any dialogue. Except that here a little more transformation of relationships when you see the other's point of view, and not only see the other point of view, but incorporate that point of view in your understanding and in the decision that you collectively take. That actually transforms relationships between people. You might say that, okay, you may have that point of view, I don't agree with you, and since I'm in the majority or I'm in a position in which I have to implement it, it's going to be my point of view. That doesn't help. That's not really, it will, if anything, further fester the relationship. But if the dialogic process helps you to make spaces for other points of view, plural points of view, and actually it enriches the work as well. And this is true for children in a multicultural classroom. The involvement, the kind of perspectives that very poor children or children from very diverse backgrounds actually bring is cognitively also enriching. In dialogue, particularly with children, at least initially for when you start the practice, a facilitator is definitely needed. And the training later on, say for middle school and high school, for children becoming facilitators, so the participants' skills and the facilitators' skills would be different. You have to first develop the skills of participation and then of facilitation, because this is also required for the facilitator to be able to see different points of view and to be able to facilitate that participants in the dialogue see the other's point of view also is important. So for democratic dialogue, a lot of preparation is also needed. For example, there can be a conflict, say about, say, bullying. So 2 or 3 boys, or I don't know if you find girl bullies, there could be. So you have to take up that issue, and if you want to resolve that through a democratic dialogue in the classroom, so you have to get the background of the children. Why are they bullying? What kind of things have happened? And then shortlist the core issues and bring them up for discussion. So a lot of background work is required, particularly in democratic dialogue, which is more sensitive than the open-ended inquiry-based dialogue. And you have to also prepare for what could be possible solutions for taking things forward. And resolutions usually don't happen in one dialogic episode. You have to prepare for 2 or 3 rounds, particularly if it's a small issue, it could happen in one, but if it's a long-standing issue, then it becomes problematic. Okay, so I'm leaving you with some tasks that you can try out if you wish to, and you can respond to me on email as to how it goes. I'm doing this, you can choose whether you want to do it with your peers, like the Teach for India fellows, or your school community where you are working. Take up a kind of a dialogue as a project kind of thing, or with your students. And if you can do an exploratory inquiry dialogue initially. And so that is one idea. You could take up a dialogue, choose a topic, choose it in consultation with the children as to how you would take that forward and when you would have dialogues, who would do what. Or you could have a dialogue group amongst your peers. For example, you want to explore the idea of language, say language and multilingualism, or you want to explore the idea of democracy, and you can form small groups, say about 6 to 8 people. Web groups, you could form a group, whichever medium you would like, say WhatsApp or email group or whatever, and then develop a dialogue group on that, and with a specific time period, so that and at the end of it you come out with the outcomes of that dialogue. So one of these, I would suggest that as many of you who can, if you could take up one of these issues, one of these either with the children or amongst your peer group, an exploratory dialogue, that would be good. That experience would be good for you. If you have a conflict situation in your workspace, see if you would like to explore.
Anjali, your voice is.
Not necessarily a conflict.
Anjali, your voice is breaking a little. Okay, I think there might be an internet issue from Anjali's side. We'll just wait for her, she'll be back. But I think she's just sharing strategies in the classroom, which we can use. In the meantime, Ashwath has written down a lot of the things that Anjali has been discussing. Do write your questions in here. We will break for questions soon now. Also, the questions that you had written in your registration form as well, some of those we've picked up and we will take them up now. At least the ones that are really immediately relevant to the topic of discussion. But do tell us in the meantime that, whatever was discussed today, what are you taking back today from all the discussion? I know a lot of you have shared already ideas in terms of you've tried democratic dialogue in your own classrooms. I think Tanushri and Reena have been sharing challenges that they've faced. Participation seems to be one of the biggest challenges. And I thought that Tanushri and Reena, please bring that up with Anjali as well once she's back. That how does one address this problem of participation among children, especially when they have not participated in a democratic dialogue before. Totally, Tanushri, yes. They need to feel comfortable first. I completely agree. And that comes from teachers, I think, from the very beginning. The ideas, some of the ideas that you shared. Yeah, Anjali has just shared a message with me. She's just signing in back. Tanushri, how do you think that they can feel comfortable? Yeah. Hi, Anjali. Hi, Anjali. Anjali,
yeah, almost to the end of it.
Sure. I think one of the important questions that Tanushri and Reena also raised was that people, especially children who've not participated in a democratic dialogue before, how do you get them to even participate in the very beginning? What is it? So they said first is to make them comfortable. Is there any other thing that we can do to make them participate in a dialogue?
See, you have to first of all set up a process of dialogue, decide on it in the classroom. For example, set a timing, a date, and the purpose of that dialogue. And so initially there'll be some children who will be very quiet. So as a teacher, you will need to talk to them separately as well, as to what are the things that interest them, why are they not keeping quiet, encouraging them. So you have to get to know what will draw them into the dialogue as well. So can you hear me?
Yes, Anjali. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So and one thing I wanted to say, can you preserve the chat and mail it to me?
Yes, we can do that. Yes.
So then I can respond on mail as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anjali, yeah, we are moving into questions now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so we saw that when the mother tongue is structurally and idiomatically and culturally quite different from the second language, it may not even have the concepts that or like of democracy, the way that metaphorically that community looks at participation may be quite different, and you may need very different ways of communicating those ideas to the children. So this is something. So you can have a multilingual kind of dialogue also. Depends on any of you are in a multilingual situation of more than of two or more languages in the classroom. Are they saying yes?
Yes, Anjali. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So you could ask children whom you know are of different language backgrounds to actually express in their own language. And then it brings out very important and useful concepts when you do that. Concepts which are important for ways of looking at the world. For example, how you look at nature. And how, say, tribals in different tribe, for example, in one of the areas where we are working in Shahpur, it's at the foothills of, and so there are a lot of wild boars and wild animals which come and spoil the crops. So before they sow the crops, they have a kind of ritual in which they talk to the wild boar very respectfully and ask for permission to sow, and ask him that even if you have to eat, only don't destroy our crops. So there is this, you can make out that there is this feeling of coexistence in that tribe. Which is very different from appropriating land and its products and things only for humans. So this idea can be used in that kind of a classroom to increase empathy and counter the competitive kind of ideas which create violence. Yeah, the first and second questions are similar. So basically, the facilitator needs to understand, even if the facilitator can attempt to learn a bit of the language, that will be very useful. But finding bilinguals in that language, at least getting the concepts from that language and culture, it will be very important to develop ideas of democracy and the social science concepts. This is a very important and interesting question, the language teacher and the social studies teacher. So one of the things is if you're using NCERT textbooks, NCRT textbooks that we had done that in Eklavya textbooks also, that there is something called DART, which is Directed Activities for Teaching Reading. So in the subject textbooks also, there are language activities. So the comprehension activities, the activities and questions in between, those are basically language issues. So if you communicate, if you have a process of meeting, say weekly or fortnightly, that I'll be doing these chapters, what chapters will you be doing? These are the language issues. If you can reinforce them in your classroom and plan chapters like that, that is a very good idea. Actually, even at the textbook level, it doesn't happen. I mean, in NCRT, the language textbook creators and the social science textbook creators never sat together. Actually, the language people must sit across all this thing to see that the level of language is appropriate for that classroom. This fourth question is also important, that in fact, multilingualism and multiculturalism, but what I talked about, democracy and inclusion. So inclusivity of different languages and the concepts and ideas in their language to be a dialogue. Otherwise, it's a one-way thing with the teacher, the lecture method. The teacher reads or asks students to read, but directs the whole classroom. That doesn't give an opportunity for children to express in their own language. And whereas if you break it into dialogue groups, break the class into dialogue groups, and purposively also, if you have 3 or 4 languages in the classroom, it is good that if those languages, or at least 2 of them, are represented in each group. So this actually multilingualism, I don't know, I didn't go through the whole multilingualism webinar, whether they, I think they did stress the fact that multilingualism actually has a lot of cognitive advantage. So if children are exposed to different languages, in the mind there is a process in which you try to make sense of the different language through context. You can also decipher its grammar and, for example, whether there is a gender-verb relationship in the other language or not. If so, what kind of relationship? And it's a very interesting cognitive exercise also to linguistically analyze languages. That is different from learning the language, but it definitely creates a metacognition of language, and it also creates an empathy for the other language. Otherwise, because you understand that the other language also has a grammar, even if it is not it may not have a script, but it has a grammar, and its grammar may be more advanced than your own grammar. So this kind of an exercise in multilingual groups is extremely important for democracy as well. Yes, seminar-based class, what levels are you all teaching? Is it high school as well, 9th, 10th as well, or it is up to middle grades? Seminars are more mature things. If dialogic project-based processes can happen in the middle school and they write up what they discuss, then they can graduate into seminars in the high school. Okay, yeah, this is an interesting, the second question in this slide. The action part of it. So you can, maybe if you have a month or so of dialogue exploring a topic, then you can actually take up some kind of action. Like, I don't know what are the kinds of schools you're working in. Something as something even like garbage management in the school. If it's a large school, or rainwater harvesting, or water recycling, or recycling of garbage. So how will we do it in our school? Specific planning for that. That in itself is a very important social science and life skill. That which we in our society, it's hard to come by, because we don't get down to specific. In fact, we have a negative kind of a phrase for it, mean make mat nikalo. Whereas in English, it says the devil is in the details. So, so if you have to, if you haven't worked out the details properly, some glitch, some small glitch will totally finish off your project. So, so this, if this is a very important question for democracy, that how do we, one second. How do we take a class to self-driven action post a democratic decision where everyone feels accountable but not by compulsion? So if they have been, if parts of their opinion and contribution have been incorporated in the decision, that's the first step. And then allocation, self-allocation of responsibility, a culture of taking responsibility. Okay, who will do this? Okay, so and so. So then the volunteering process. And then a review process, because all of us, we volunteer for things and we get diverted into other things. So kind of non-violent way in which we can remind each other and get things done. So it's basically practicing all these things to move towards better implementation. What are some of the teacher actions that can initiate and sustain the dialogue regarding democracy in our classroom? So one is basically, if you are able to set an annual routine of say if you have a project a quarter, so that project itself is a democratically negotiated thing and everyone contributes to it. Then you have rule making in the classroom, and then the practice of those rules at on a daily basis, and a review and practice of it on a daily basis. So you can think of, as a teaching community, what are the kinds of classroom or school rules. So instead of the teachers or the principal dictating those rules, you can negotiate with the principal whether you can try out this rule setting kind of thing. The third is the conflict resolution, getting students' participation into conflict resolution situation. So basically it means changing the culture of the school, and it can't be done at one go. So if you have, say, most of you, if you're teachers, Teach for India fellows, you have 2 years. So many of you would be in your first year. So if you start now taking one thing at a time, one thing in a quarter, then by say the 4th quarter or so, you'll see that if you have somewhat, and it won't be possible everywhere. You might have very the Calvin kind of leaders also, what Calvin was indicating there. People who just want to show that they are in power. There you'll find it very difficult. There you can just retain at the project level and not school decision making. But in a little, you'll get little space there. The exams, and believe me, if children start participating in dialogue and then writing them up, then that writing practice on a regular basis. In fact, we have just started a project across 2 places, Shahpur, a rural area where we work, and this working out details is quite this thing. And there are 3 organizations here in Bhopal across whom we are distributing letters from those children. So we are trying to have an interaction through letters between Shahpur, this kind of an area where they pray to the wild boar, and Bhopal, and with different classes of children. And these children have never met each other, so they've started giving their introduction to each other, and now they will be writing to each other. So this is also a one-to-one dialogue process, trying to understand the other and get to know the other and make friends with them. In the same place we had done a project on livelihoods, on water, and on agriculture during our summer camps. Similar kind of group work, going and interviewing, working it out. When they write out some of these things, you can see that within 10 to 15 days, their writing and thinking abilities show an exponential kind of a growth. So this fear that they won't do well in exams is misplaced. They will actually be writing much better. The other problem becomes, I don't know how much of a problem that is in the places where you work, that the teachers are actually behind that kind of writing and ability of children, and they evaluate children badly. So that you may come up with some instances of that the teachers are finding it hard to understand children's elaborate writings and don't know how to evaluate such expressive writing.
Anjali,
now we are finishing. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I mean,
really, finish.
Right? Just can you, what do you think about the webinar today? I just want to hear from you. I think participants are sharing their feedback in the chat box.
Okay, so I'll close this. If I can look at the chat box, I'll get back to the...
Also, do tell us, what do you make of the webinar today? How did you like the interaction? And then I can also, like from the previous one, I think this one definitely has been more engaging. We've seen a lot of interaction. Yeah.
Okay, so that's, I'll be able to respond later. One thing, this did help me to focus and take the flow better, because I didn't look at the chat, which I'll look at now after you send it to me.
Sure, I will do that, Anjali. Yeah.
So that tweaking of technology helped. Yeah. So there's some sharing of resources. This TNF online, there's availability of the full text in this, because usually you have to buy that.
Yeah, the full text is available. Yeah.
Oh, free. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Okay. Good. And did you feel that it brought together the last and a bit of the multilingual? Ekta?
Yes, Anjali. Yeah, I thought you were asking that to the participants, so I didn't respond. No, I think it definitely did, because I think you referred to the multilingual, and I know that you personally also feel that other languages should be represented, and you brought that up in the previous webinar as well. So I think some of those strategies are the ones that participants also mentioned are important, because that is the reality in the classrooms, to be honest.
Okay.
So that was, I think that was addressed very well here, for sure. So I think I'll just also share a few things at the end. It's been very interesting to sort of learn some of the way you weaved in the language theory, and went on to discuss a little bit about how dialogue should be constructed in a classroom, and then coming to the classroom strategies of moving ahead. I think the idea is definitely not through this discussion to say that these things are, you can just get it done in one day. I think all of us understand that, but let's also try some of these strategies that Anjali shared today in our own classrooms, and come back for the third webinar and discuss a little bit that what are the challenges that you faced. I think let's start the next webinar with those challenges and see how all of us can sort of help each other, overcome some of those challenges through the experiences. So I think that will be very interesting.
I'll look forward to getting some mails from you on say just brief write-ups, say a page or a page and a half on how what you try in the classroom.
Sure.
And particularly if any of you manage to get otherwise very quiet children a little animated because of these practices, that would make very good case studies kind of thing, how they change. You can,
Great.
yes,
So,
yeah.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you for putting so much effort into all this as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you.